a lot of our patients who take our test, we've asked informally, like, do they want to live over 100? At the end of the day, what you want is to have just a little more awareness of your own health in a way where you feel empowered to do something about it.
As we are learning and trying new protocols to extend our healthy lifespan, we should not just go based on how we feel. Feelings about protocols are not always reliable. We need some objective measurement, a way to assess the efficacy of our protocols. What we really need is a biological clock, and we need a biological clock test. Let's understand more about biological age testing protocols and options with our next speaker. Abigail Kang is the marketing manager, and I'm going to call her the communications director for MyDNAge, which is a DNA age test brand owned by Epigenetic.
We do provide additional value in every single one of our blood tests by providing genetic information. So we have your APOE results, and that's essentially understanding your genetic risk for Alzheimer's disease. So if you have the APOE4 genetic variation, you could be at greater risk of developing Alzheimer's and dementia. One thing that we did was actually reach out to everybody who's taken our test who tends to have a much lower biological age than their chronological age. And one thing that we found was longevity alone might not be the best measure of any anti-aging interventions, but it might just be helping you live a healthier life for long.
Hi, my name is Chris Burris. I'm a longevity expert and the chief scientist at a lab focused on a longevity molecule. My primary focus is to help people live longer and better lives with science. Make sure to subscribe and share so you and your friends can live longer and better, so you and your friends can live beyond the norms.
Abigail Kang, thank you so much for joining us.
Thanks so much for having me here today.
So the ability to process scientific information and papers and what the geeky scientists around your office are talking about, and then turn around and speak in layman's terms, which I hope you do today, about the science is not a typical skill. What's your background and what leads you to your current role at MyDNAge?
So my academic background is in history and international relations. So I'm very good at essentially reading a lot of very dense information and digesting it. And also while I was studying in London, my housemate was a bio major, and I used to help him proofread all of his papers. So that's where I managed to, keep an understanding of science and the latest developments. Since then, I've had a traditional training background in public relations, writing for customers in fintech and hospitality. And I've been doing digital marketing for the past few years, first for plastic surgeons, so able to essentially promote medical concepts to customers, as well as the digital marketing manager for the Asia Pacific region for Monster Energy. So bounced around a lot of places, learned a lot of different things. And now that I'm here working more in the biotech and healthcare field, just really applying everything that I know in communicating clearly and effectively to different audiences.
And we've already had some conversations, so I know you're going to do a fantastic job and keep it in layman's terms. How long have you been with Epigenetic?
So I have been here for about coming on 2 years now. So it's been a very interesting journey, just learning so much about the science, about the great work that our team does. Every year we have different projects going on, continuing to develop and improve on the science. And really just the directions that they've taken it in have been very, very interesting. So not going to give you any spoilers just yet. We're going to talk a little bit about some of the things that are upcoming for us later on.
And you shared that Epigenetic is a company, and we won't get into any names, but other biological age clocks kind of lean on you guys at times to do verification of their own clocks, right?
Mm-hmm. So the community in this is fairly small. We know a lot of the other biological age tests out there. We are the only company that has, we have the exclusive commercial license to Dr. Steve Horvath's biological age clock. So because of that, if companies are essentially creating their own clock and they want to compare it, we are the gold standard for commercial biological age tests still.
That is great to know. So we have come to the source. I really appreciate that. You mentioned Steve Horvath. My next question is, what is biological age? And you're probably going to mention Steve Horvath at some point.
Yes, absolutely. So I have a little presentation just so that we are able to follow along with some of these concepts. So I have an introduction to biological aging. So if you think about your chronological age, that's just how much time has elapsed since birth. Biological age is something that is completely different. It is essentially a measure of your body's processes. How well is it functioning relative to other people around the same age as you? So let's say you have a chronological age of 25, but you've been taking good care of yourself. You eat right. You make sure that you don't smoke. You're not drinking too much. Your biological age could be 21 or 22 compared to your peers, essentially. So biological age, if you think about the science of it, there actually hasn't been a scientific consensus of what biological age is exactly. But in general, most scientists agree that when it comes to biological age, it is based on not just your genetic factors, but also your lifestyle and environment.
Let's talk about really kind of bring in Dr. Steve Horvath as some sort of way to assess biological age, and maybe talk about the potential biological ages that are potentially available to be able to test for.
If we're looking at different biological age clocks, Dr. Steve Horvath was one of the pioneers of creating a pan-tissue clock and creating a quantitative way of measuring your biological age. There are a lot of different types of biomarkers. So biomarkers are essentially a biological way of a biological measurement that you can use to provide you with an answer of what your biological age is. We use epigenetics, and later I'm going to go into why epigenetics is the preferred method for most scientists when it comes to quantifying biological age. But there are a lot of other means through which you can potentially calculate a biological age score. Some people use proteins, proteomics. Some people use telomeres. Some people use glycans, which is a measure of inflammation in your body. There are also other things, including hormones or metabolism markers that you can use to calculate your biological age.
And yours is, if I'm correct, DNA methylation. Is that correct? Talk to a little bit about like what that is and what that might mean to a layperson.
So what exactly is epigenetics? This is the big picture stuff. Epi is the Greek for on top of. So if you think about your genes, this is what sits one layer above them. Your genes are something that don't change. Your DNA across your liver, across your brain, across the rest of your body, that's essentially the same DNA sequence. Epigenetics is the changes in the gene function that don't involve changes to this underlying DNA structure. So if you look at twins, for example, completely same DNA sequence, but if there are differences in their diet and nutrition or exposure to toxins or stress, all of these can result in epigenetic modifications that influence how these same genes get expressed. So from one twin to the next, you can have somebody who's working a high-stress job, for example. That twin might essentially have more epigenetic changes that cause accelerated aging compared to the twin who's less stressed. So this results in different life outcomes. not just for aging, but also for things like cancer.
And really, Dr. Steve Horvath kind of looked at this, noticed some sort of trend of decline, we'll call it, as we age, and really started mapping that out so we could really get a statistically significant understanding of what DNA methylation looks like or what epigenetics look like at a particular age, chronological age. Is that a fair description?
Mm-hmm. So that's a fair description. And here you can see exactly what this looks like in the cell. If you look at DNA methylation, you can think of them as like little hats that sit on top of your DNA strand, and whether one of them is turned on or off, for example, or essentially it's not a yes or no, but there are ranges to this. So you can see, for example, between a normal cell and a cancer cell, there might be sites with methylation, and the degree of methylation can let you know, for example, how much cancer is there in a cell and how far has it progressed, for example.
So how many data points went into kind of looking at the DNA methylation status compared to chronological age?
So when it comes to measuring your biological age through DNA methylation, it really depends on which CpG sites you're looking at. So, for example, in your DNA, there are different parts that would tell you whether you're aging or whether you have cancer. So our test looks at over 2,000 different CpG sites. That's more than double the original clock that Dr. Steve Horvath looked at. When it comes to understanding which CpG sites to look at, how we got to it was we did whole genome sequencing in order to identify the right CpG sites. When it comes to measuring your biological age or even diagnosing cancer, the more sites doesn't mean better quality. It's really all about finding and measuring very specific sites that are actually relevant and useful to what you need to know. So there are some tests that tell you they measure tens of thousands or hundreds of thousands of sites. You can do that, but essentially a lot of what you're getting might be junk data that doesn't actually correspond to aging necessarily. What we do is we're a little bit more targeted in what we measure, and we've selected every single one of these sites for a reason, and there is a proper scientific backing for why a lot of these sites have been chosen. A lot of the research that our lead scientist does looks into metabolism and how metabolism affects your biological age. So a lot of these CpG sites that we look into are metabolism focused. Another part of her research looks into stress and PTSD on the impacts of aging. So that's something that we are continuing our research into, and we're going to be adding some of these sites onto our test as well, just to provide more refinement, to ensure that the information that we're sharing with you is robust and it actually is relevant to things that can cause aging.
So it's kind of like I think I've taken at least one age test, like on online survey age test. And it's like, do you smoke? Or do you consider yourself under a lot of stress? Do you exercise? And you're kind of doing that survey, but you're asking the DNA, like actually epigenetic level. So not just the DNA, right? The responses. And you're looking at, are you stressed? And you're getting the real answer, because I might say no. And my body might be going, yeah, we have differences of opinion. And then it's interesting because you could think about a whole profile that matches a general population, and then throwing in cancer now just skews all the data, right? So what is your actual age, which is an interpretation of like how much longer are you going to live? If you understand that cancer's in there, then that has a dramatic negative impact. I mean, all of this makes a whole lot of sense.
Absolutely correct. So to your point about how much stress am I under? How much do I smoke? All of these things are essentially written in your epigenetic code, and there can be variations. So let's say you're a 2-pack-a-day smoker versus a 1 cigarette every once in a while kind of smoker. This, over time, gets coded into your epigenetics, and we can actually see at specific DNA methylation points. It's not a strict yes or no, zeros and ones. It's actually a curve. So we can see, for example, have you been under a lot of stress lately? That's going to affect it. But if you have a little bit of stress here and there throughout the day, throughout the work week, but it's nothing chronic, we might see a little bit, but that's also something that might not. So we're able to essentially differentiate different levels of environmental factors and how they're affecting you.
And can you kind of outline a little bit about how some of the other clocks work? You mentioned a couple of them, telomeres, glycans. How do those kind of work in a compare and contrast perspective?
So essentially, when it comes to telomeres, that's you're measuring telomere length. A lot of the tests out on the market that measure telomeres, they're comparing against a very average white man in an industrial country. That's the standard telomere length that they give you. And that's not actually as accurate. When it comes to measuring telomere length as well, one of the best ways to get a more accurate telomere length is through DNA methylation. So we keep going back and forth on, do we want to add telomeres to our test? Because we could. It's just, does it provide any more value than we already do? When it comes to things like glycans, for example, you can think of glycans as like that immune response in your body, but that's also a step removed from epigenetics, because the epigenetic changes are what's going to essentially provide you with whether the glycans, the good or bad glycans essentially are being...
How their profile is changing over time or over inputs.
Yeah, essentially. So why do you want to go one step below when you can just go to the source?
Interesting. Is there any lag in this epigenetic testing? So like if I, go out on a alcohol and tobacco bender today and I wake up tomorrow and I take a test, does that show up immediately?
So when it comes to your epigenetics, you can see the effects of something that's cumulative. So if you go on one bender and you never do it again, it's probably not going to affect your biological age. But if you're somebody who's going out drinking and smoking, you're not sleeping very well, and that's something that you do day in, day out, that's definitely going to get coded. So when it comes to taking our test, for example, we say one good thing is not going to change your biological age. One bad thing probably not going to change your biological age either. The nice thing about epigenetics is the fact that any changes can also be reversed. This delves in quite neatly with the point about if you're sick, for example, let's say you had COVID, that's not going to affect you for the rest of your life if you're able to recover.
So how many people have taken your test?
So we've run a few tens of thousands of tests for various patients across the world, and that's allowed us to provide a lot of people with data that they need to improve their biological age. We have a lot of return customers, so people are very happy with the data that they received, and they're essentially more motivated knowing a number to make changes to their lifestyle.
And it seems to me, right, so we're talking about lifestyle changes. You need multiple tests to understand, like, if your lifestyle changes. In fact, I took a test once. We'll talk about that here soon, and recently submitted for a second test. But you really need multiple tests to understand if the protocols, if the lifestyle changes that you're making, of the tens of thousands, have most of them taken it twice? What's the kind of ratio of only one? And maybe you don't even have this off the top of your head, but 40% have only ever taken it once, or what does that look like?
So a majority of our customers end up becoming repeat customers. So if you take it only once, it's good, but what are you going to do with that data? And if you've made changes, how are you tracking it? So you essentially have to take the test more than once to make sure any changes that you're doing after you've had that baseline is going to it's going to get tracked.
Are you running any kind of collaborative studies with, hey, we implement this protocol or we make this nutritional change or whatever it is, and then tracking their age and seeing the impact of those protocols?
So we haven't done this for human test subjects, but we have done this for dogs. And that's a clinical paper that's going to be published in a journal sometime later this year. And that's something that we're very excited about. When it comes to geroscience and longevity, measuring impacts on people tends to be a little bit harder because you have this quantifiable test, but how does it really play out in the long term? Humans are fairly long-lived as test subjects, and that's why you see a lot of tests, including ones that we contribute to, have to do with animal subjects. So a lot of papers that our lead epigenetic scientist, Dr. Yang, gets involved in are mice studies or rat studies. There has been a shift towards doing more studies with dogs because they live in very similar home environments to us and their needs are the same. They're social creatures. They need to exercise. They need mental stimulation and enrichment. And because they aren't as long-lived as we are, we can track over time more easily the impact of therapeuticals on them. So that's what we are moving into, and we're obviously very open to using our test and providing different types of quantification to researchers everywhere. So yeah.
You are enjoying, well, at least I hope you're enjoying, the Live Beyond the Norms podcast. Make sure you subscribe, make sure you follow, and make sure you share. But don't be that annoying guy, whatever you do. Don't share it with people who aren't actually interested in living beyond the norms.
I want to come back to the dog study because we had a brief conversation about that before. So with these tests and maybe with a collection of people who are taking multiple tests, do you guys have a sense of what factors are the most influential? And of course, we're thinking nutrition, exercise, sleep. What are you guys seeing has the most impact?
So nutrition is essentially the biggest factor, and that's why we have a part of our test is also looking very specifically into a score that we call the epimetabolic index. So that's looking at epigenetic factors and metabolism in your body. It's a compound score that looks into your ability to metabolize lipids, glucose, and all kinds of other things. And if your score is on the higher side, for example, you might be more predisposed to developing metabolic disorders, including diabetes. Independent scientific studies have essentially validated the exact same biomarkers that we look into for the epimetabolic index, and we're very glad that other people are seeing the value in the science that we're doing.
So nutrition, number one, and that's kind of not a surprise if you think about, in the personal training, in the bodybuilding environment, a lot of people will say like, your abs are earned in the kitchen. They're not earned actually in exercise, and abs, as whatever, an extremely rough guideline of, because you can have abs and not be healthy, right? As a guideline. What's next, right? So we got nutrition. Do you like, what's the next thing on your radar is like, hey, this is also a good protocol?
So the next thing on our radar is exercise, but unfortunately, something that we found and something that a lot of other scientists have found is too much exercise also isn't good for you and your biological age. There have been studies into bodybuilders or elite athletes, and as they train, their biological ages tend to be much higher than everybody around them. We don't know exactly why this is, but if you look at it, there are just extremes. If you're exercising too much or you're not exercising at all, that provides a very similar impact on your biological age and longevity. So there's a nice sweet spot when it comes to exercise, and we really encourage everybody to find that out for themselves. Like, what makes you feel good while also, in the long run, provide the best and optimal amount of exercise for your body.
Well, I think that's another reason to kind of take another MyDNAge test. I know I have conversations with people regularly, and if you didn't train or participate in a kind of aggressive sport, and what I mean is just like high school level, where you're on the varsity team, you don't kind of have an understanding of how to push your body, and you probably inherently need to be pushing your body more than you think is comfortable. I have conversations with people who are, personal trainers, and they're like, oh, I've got some customers who are like, at the first sign of any sort of discomfort, they just stop. And you probably need to push a little bit more than that. And then you have these ultra trainers, ultra runners, or ultra athletes doing extreme distance. And, at some point, they're looking for more pain. And there's some point where it's a detrimental effect. I remember when I read in one of Dr. Gundry's books, he talked about marathoners will show a heart scarring. And part of me was like, okay, I run half marathons with my wife basically every year. We're in the training. We just started training for the Houston Half Marathon here that's coming up in January. And no part of me thinks I'm doing damage to my heart at my pace. But it dawned on me that in that study, they're probably looking at these ultra elite athletes who are trying to extract every second they can from every mile. And yeah, as a general answer, I would say you've got emotional stresses, and maybe you can talk about that next. Those are going to have a negative impact. But these are physical stresses on your body. Like, there is no other way to describe it. Yes, you rebound and you become a better athlete, but I'm kind of not surprised that you see that deleterious effect. What about emotional stresses? Do you guys have any sense for that?
Yes. So one thing that we did was actually reach out to everybody who's taken our test who tends to have a much lower biological age than their chronological age. And one thing that we found was very similar across every interview that we did. So this is a longevity secret that I'm sharing with you. Every single one of them was very deeply enmeshed in their community. Good family ties, a lot of strong social ties, and that actually does have a difference to your health. Not just your emotional health, but also your physical health.
Yeah, I had a conversation with my son who tends to be very comfortable being isolated, and I was like, this is going to be hard for you to understand, but you are actually killing yourself by isolating yourself. Like, what? How is that even possible? And yes, he's young. He's 13. And I said, well, the data says if you don't have a good peer group, like a good community, like, you tend to die younger. So you're killing yourself by not having good friends. So the secret is have a community, work hard, even if it is hard work for you. Maybe you're introverted, which really means you get your energy alone. And so it can cause a lot of work hard to create that community for you, because it does have a positive impact on your longevity. In fact, maybe you should just join a longevity group. And then you can talk about the exciting things, and that can be the group that you're in. How does illness, or so whether it's a bacterial infection, a viral infection, surgery, of course, COVID, that's certainly on the radar, impact the test results?
So when it comes to the test results, you're essentially taking a snapshot of your epigenetic profile at that point in time. If you take it while you're having or have just recovered from a severe COVID infection, for example, your biological age is going to be higher than it normally would be. But everything that we've seen, we tested everybody in the office over COVID. Anybody who was sick during COVID had a spiked biological age, and then after they were recovered, 6 months to a year later, everything went back down to normal again. So the thing that we've seen ages you for longest is having a baby.
Oh, wow.
So
Yeah.
whether
No
you're the
surprise
mother
there.
or the father, for that first 6 months to a year after having a kid, your biological age is going to go way out. Once you get your sleep, once you found your routine, your biological age goes back down to normal, essentially.
So during the pregnancy, do you see a younger biological age, an older biological age, or is it just on par with the chronological, assuming you haven't changed your protocols?
Yes. During pregnancy, it's usually on par, but once the baby's born, that's when you see that huge spike.
So that would throw maybe the next kind of factor. We've got nutrition, exercise. I don't know that community is really number 3, but it's a kind of hidden secret. Is sleep number 3?
Mm-hmm. So sleep is definitely one of them, because sleep is going to affect your ability to handle stress as well. So we think that sleep is a huge factor when it comes to having a good biological age. We do see that some people might need less sleep than others, but it's really just getting enough sleep for your body. So maybe that's going to be 5 hours for somebody and it's going to be 9 hours for somebody else. It's really just finding that sweet spot for yourself.
Yeah, and I know in the book by Matthew Walker, While We Sleep, which unfortunately doesn't have the tagline "and why we don't have to," like David Sinclair is "Why We Age and Why We Don't Have to." It would be nice if Matthew Walker's book was "Why We Sleep and Why We Don't Have to," but there's no that part. You actually do need sleep.
No, you do need sleep.
I think he says there's a 2% chance. I mean, there's 2% of the population that doesn't need. I think that can survive healthily with less than 6 hours of sleep. And the typical recommendation is 7.5 to 9 hours of what they call sleep opportunity. Sleep is incredibly important. How often do you recommend that people get a test?
So we recommend that people only test maybe once every year. Do an annual test, because when it comes to any lifestyle changes, you need to make it consistent. You need to make it a habit. So we want to make sure that whatever you've done, it's stuck and you're able to see the impacts later on.
And you did earlier mention, that there was a spike, so an additional tick on the DNAge, right? So on the biological age for people who are going through COVID, and then you said about 6 months to a year later. Were you tracking people and it really took about 6 months, or is that just a number you're like, hey, we just test every 6 months, and so at 6 months later they were fine?
Yes, that's essentially how we did it. It wasn't very robust. It was an informal internal test. Yeah, just for us to sort of know. But I think if we had thought about it sooner, we probably would have just gone like every month over month. Yeah.
That would be fascinating.
Mm-hmm.
And then do you have any, so COVID certainly just spread like wildfire and everybody was exposed to it. Are there any other diseases that are kind of on the radar? Like we're aware the flu, or we're aware, the common cold, no big deal, the flu, a big deal. Any inputs on that?
So for us, we've noticed that if it's going to be an infection that passes quickly, not really a big deal. But things like cancer, for example, that's definitely on our radar, because when it comes to tumor formation, epigenetic changes are one of the first warning signs. So that's how you can potentially detect cancer early through a non-invasive test. So one thing that we are working on right now is a urine-based pan-cancer panel. So just looking at your epigenetic biomarkers, if your biological age is way up, that's usually a canary in a coal mine. You probably need to get tested. We work with different clinics providing this test all around the world. And we have one clinic who just exclusively sends us urine tests. We keep telling them, hey, we have a blood test that provides a more comprehensive picture of your whole body. But for that, anecdotally, just to let you guys know, with that clinic, we've had a couple of samples come in, and the patients later had bladder cancer. So that's why they're like, no, we're sticking with this test in our entire pool of patients to find bladder cancer early with this test. That's essentially been a huge help for them. So we've looked into this, and we're actually developing a panel that looks into different cancers of the urinary tract. Because if we can help people detect cancer early with this test, that's going to be huge. There's a geroscience hypothesis that essentially says focusing on the aging process itself is key, because aging in that conceptualization is a systemic disease. So instead of focusing on different age-associated diseases like Alzheimer's, for example, or the development of cancer, which your chances do increase as you age, looking at aging on a whole could essentially help prevent or lessen the severity of age-related conditions simultaneously. So longevity alone might not be the best measure of any anti-aging interventions, but it might just be helping you live a healthier life for longer. A lot of our patients who take our test, we've asked informally, like, do they want to live over 100? Or like, what exactly is their goal here? And most of them say, I don't need to live that long. What I want are quality years. The dream for a lot of people is like, I can live and travel and work and do everything that I want, and then I drop dead at 80 and I'm fine.
I call that the because I was recording the audio for my book, and I forgot I had included this in it. And by the way, recording audio for your book, your own book, is just a pain. Like, it's so much harder than you would think. So kudos to everybody out there who's recording their own books. But I used an example of a candle, right? A candle burns perfectly. In fact, it burns the same. It's a little shorter, which is also true with old age. Often it's a little shorter, right? But then it's gone in an instant, right? So it's gone from a bright, vibrant candle flame to then out. And I think that's how most people would like to pass, right? Like that is the mindset. You talked about if your biological age is showing a lot, if it's way up, you might want to look at other things. What would be way up?
So if your biological age is 10 or more years higher than your chronological age, that's a warning sign. You have something and you need to find out what it is.
And if they do, so you were talking about the bladder cancer test, and I think that's what is one of the focuses of Epimorphy, right? The parent company. If they do get so as an example, let's talk about my results. So my result, I took this back and I gave the sample in November of 2020. At the time, I was 51. My DNA was 59. Boo. but it's a number, right? It's a number you can work with. So that's 7 years. I also think that COVID was in there, right? So I don't remember exactly when I had it. I've had it twice, twice that were certainly noticeable. Maybe I've had it another time and we just don't, it comes across as a cold now. But so that's 7 years. You're like, okay, don't worry too much. And some of it probably has to do with your actual age. Like if you're 24 years and you're showing up 9 years older or in this case, 7 years older, maybe that's worth looking at. Or does that sound about right?
Correct. So with this clock, with the Horvath clock, generally if you're 18 and younger, it tracks your chronological age almost exactly. And then after that, there's more room for variation, and you can sort of see, if you think about it as a graph, it could deviate. The deviations grow. So as you get older in your 50s and 60s, that deviation could look much wider. But obviously, if you're sick while you take the test, you're going to have a much higher biological age than you might if you were healthy. So that's why we encourage you to take it on a day where you're feeling, your best.
Yeah. And maybe a week you're feeling your best. Hey, make sure you're back at homeostasis, and for 7 to 10 days, and then take it. And I recently took that test. I don't have the results yet. I'm excited to get the new ones. I'm certainly hoping it's younger. But if it shows up 9, you say go do some research. Where do I go?
So we still recommend you just talk with your primary care physician,
Yep.
saying, "Hey, I've done a test and it's showing that there could be something."
I can see how that conversation is going. What kind of test did you do? DNAge. Yeah. Never heard of that. That sounds irrelevant. Why are you here? Right. So you got to walk them through that process.
Mm-hmm, exactly. It's really just a form of education. I think at the end of the day, what you want is to have just a little more awareness of your own health in a way where you feel empowered to do something about it.
I almost think that conversation goes like, well, listen, from the scientists at the lab, and maybe you don't mention, the lab is epimorphy, right? Instead of MyDNAge, because that sounds a little more retail. They suggested that this type of result might be indicative of cancer, like that might be one of the things. I wrote down a couple of others, so are you guys able to kind of pinpoint, and does it have an impact is the real question, on things like MS, Alzheimer's, Parkinson's, ALS?
So our biological age test doesn't pinpoint all those things specifically, but we do provide additional value in every single one of our blood tests by providing genetic information. So we have your APOE results, and that's essentially understanding your genetic risk for Alzheimer's disease. So if you have the APOE4 genetic variation, you could be at greater risk of developing Alzheimer's and dementia. So if you're getting an APOE test outside, it's over $100, and that's just baked into our test already.
And that's new from when I took the test. I mean, maybe the printed version of your test doesn't cover some of that, but is that just straight up new?
So that's straight up new. That's something that we launched in 2021. So that's definitely new, and you're going to receive that information in the new test that you've taken. This is only to do with this only is provided with the blood test. To your point, when it comes to pinpointing specific diseases, the urine test gives you a very clear snapshot of your urinary tract health, but the blood test, because it is a comprehensive whole body, it could be anywhere within your body system. Another thing that we provide in terms of genetic information is also MTHFR, and that is understanding whether your body has the gene to effectively use folate and other types of vitamin B, or if you could be at greater risk of things like blood clot, stroke, and heart disease. So that's just additional value that we provide in terms of genetic information, because the technology that we have allows for it, on top of the epigenetic information that we're looking into. So if you guys have any ideas or other things that you would like to see that are to do with longevity, definitely let us know.
My father was diagnosed with ALS. His mother was diagnosed with ALS. And when I went to the first appointment, this is actually in my book also, this first visit, where this well-known out of San Antonio ALS doctor, basically kind of, I was there, saw this pattern, and says, if that pattern exists, then you probably have that pattern. People don't get back-to-back ALS without it being the genetic version, right? And then that means you probably have a 50-50 chance of having that particular gene. And I just thought it was fascinating that she was like, go get tested. Honestly, probably 6 months ago and before, I would say, don't bother getting tested because there's nothing that can be done about it. And now we're at an era, and this is like how fascinating and amazing the medical science is moving. Now we're in an era where where there might be solutions. There's trials going on, and so yeah, go get tested. I imagine that's a pretty low genetic likelihood. So that's probably not even on your radar. That probably doesn't need to be on your radar. One of the things I was looking into that test, by the way, I haven't had the test yet. I still am in digging into kind of the right way to handle this from frankly, from an insurance perspective, right? So did you guys kind of wrestle internally as like to just present that data? I'm assuming it's coming with clauses if they are positive, like, hey, go get some genetic counseling. Yeah, that kind of thing.
Absolutely. So our test is obviously nothing to do with insurance, not covered. And when it comes to your data, we take it very seriously. So for all of our European clients, for instance, we are in complete compliance with European data privacy laws. Your sample comes in, we generate the report, we delete your data off of our databases completely. And anybody in America, for example, you don't want your data to be kept, we'll send you your report and then it's gone. So you just have to let us know. So obviously we don't sell the data that we generate to anybody. So that's not how we make money. It's really just from our CEO's perspective, providing a service that he thinks people would be interested in. This isn't a grand money making scheme. It's really just all about the science. The consumer-based side of epimorphy is this test, but a majority of the money that we make is really just working with academics. One of the things that we're looking into right now is biological age and fertility and reproductive health. And that's just very, very interesting. The test on the human side is being used by fertility clinics because when you're trying to treat a patient with IVF, for example, understanding their biological age could tell you like which interventions might be more needed. So you have somebody who's 35, but their biological age is 40. Maybe they're going to need more significant interventions than somebody who's a straight 35. Or if somebody's 45, but their biological age is 30, maybe they're not going to need the same interventions that you would provide to people who are, I hate this term, like more geriatric in terms of pregnancy. And on the academic side, a lot of the work that we are doing right now has to do with working with an academic who's looking into naked mole rats. So we're getting a lot of naked mole rat ovaries to create tissue-specific.
That's a phrase you don't hear every day.
Yeah, because naked mole rats are like bees. The way that their colonies are structured, you have one naked mole rat who's the queen, and she's the one who's giving birth to pups. And unlike most other mammalian species, a naked mole rat can essentially give birth until the day she drops dead. So that's something that we're looking into. All of the applications for this potentially going to be really groundbreaking, but we're still a few decades off, I think, because the science still needs to get to that level. But every decade we move faster and faster, so who knows?
Yeah, you bring up so many things. My wife and I went through fertility treatment, so it would have been interesting. It makes perfect sense to throw in this biological age test. That's absolutely fascinating. I just wanted to share, because we're running out of time here, that it's interesting that your business model is different than a lot out there. That a lot of the companies that are out there providing an age test are tied into either maybe selling on the back end, which is fine. Like these are good, legitimate business models, but they're tied into maybe selling a coaching program, maybe selling some supplements on the end. So they subsidize the test, the DNAge test, or the whatever the biological age test is, and you guys aren't in that. That's not your business model, and so your test might appear to be more expensive, and it's kind of like a movie theater where a lot of people know that movie theaters don't make money on the movie, they make money on the concessions, and you guys don't have concessions, and so and it's really not even a profit model for you guys. So your tests are what they are, and there's probably a minimal profit margin in them, and it may look more expensive than the others, and those are the reasons why. And I think that gives a little bit of I like the integrity behind that business model.
Yeah.
We
are solutions agnostic. So essentially, we want people to trust the science.
Yeah. And then I also just wanted to bring up, you're bringing out a dog age test. I think I even saw some marketing collateral on it. You're shifting into this. Quickly share, I think we discussed this result. Share a kind of cool result about DNA dog biology tests, and what was driving older age dogs versus younger age dogs.
Mm-hmm. So the scientist behind this test has a dog she loves very, very much, and his name is Milo. So she just really wants to help Milo live a longer and healthier life. So all of the biomarkers used for the dog age test, the scientific platform is the same. The idea behind it is the same, but we're using canine-specific biomarkers to create this test. So until we have enough demand, we're not going to do a cat age test just yet. You can't use this for your cat, by the way, but you can use it for your dogs. What we found is we have a clinical study that's going to be published later this year, and it's found that dogs fed on a whole fresh food diet tend to do a lot better in terms of age and longevity markers than dogs fed on a kibble diet. So we used dogs that were of the same breed. This was a test solely on pugs, and these pugs lived either in good homes with their families, or they were in animal shelters or kennels. Control group fed only dry kibble, the same dry kibble, and the test group was fed with fresh food from the company that we were partnering with. And what we found was that in just 3 months, you could see a decline in biological age for every dog that was fed a whole food, fresh food diet. And 6 months later, that trend continued. So we're going to be doing follow-up studies with all of these pugs as well. But from just the preliminary results, you can see a significant decrease in biological age just from changing that one thing, nutrition.
That's awesome. By the way, I understand why you did dogs first. We have a dog and a cat product, and we sell significantly more dog product than cats. And our products is associated with longevity. The implication is that cat owners don't actually want their cats to live longer. If you're a cat owner out there, come on, you need to step up and represent your species. All right, we got to go through these questions really fast. The first one is, you're not supposed to ask a lady her age, so I'm not going to. I get to ask a unique question. What is the delta in positive or negative in your chronological age and your biological age?
So the first time I took my test, I was a year older biologically than I was
doesn't that hurt? That hurts a little, doesn't it?
It hurts.
I'm 7.
That really just motivated me to do a little bit more. So you were talking about how people who don't do sports in high school tend to not really exercise later in life. And that's true for me. I was a drama person. So that's something that I've made a change. Yeah. Something that I've tried to make a change in. My husband drags me to play pickleball now, and I'm aggressively bad at sports. But yeah. So I've also just submitted my most recent test, and I'm going to get my results back in a few weeks. So
it's going to be better.
It's going to, it's all those weekends of pickleball better have
because I get sweaty, and I was against that when I was in high school. Do you have a target age that you want to live to?
No, not for me. I'm okay. Whenever I go, I go.
Okay. And so some of these people in this longevity space, like Dr. David Sinclair, is like, it's the information theory of aging, and we can fix it all, and we can live forever. Where do you sit on that between forever and, I don't know, we'll call it today? Like, how long do you think humans can live?
So there was a very interesting paper that compared the epigenetics of different species. And it kind of hinted towards the fact that there is an upper limit, not just for us, but for all species, essentially. So very interested to see once we have more information into that, is that something that we're going to break the barriers of? Or is that something that's just not really changeable? Yeah, so exactly. So that's something that I'm looking forward to learning more about as well. Mostly because I guess the implications of it. Do you want to live forever? Like, what would that
Yeah.
look
And
like?
then what is it good for society? And David Sinclair, I think, does a good job in his book Lifespan, talking about those. All right. So next question, 2 to 3 protocols, habits, mindsets, let's call them shortcuts because everybody likes shortcuts, for longevity and health span that you would share.
Oh, there is no shortcut because things that we learned from everybody who had a much younger biological age, none of these are easy, quick fixes. So I told you about community. Another thing is optimism. So everybody that we spoke to was just such a happy, sunny person that I wanted to keep talking to them because they were just such lovely people. And we actually went and looked into this, and there have been a lot of papers that show you optimism helps you live longer, and these trends are consistent across all racial and ethnic groups. I think there was one paper that said optimistic women tend to live about 5% longer than the least optimistic women, and that translates to like 4 years. And people who are optimistic tend to live beyond 90 much more often than everybody else who isn't. Like, if you look at everybody who's world's oldest person, these are all pretty happy people. They could be smoking a cigar every night or drinking a glass of whiskey, but they're still there at 112, you know? So, yeah, optimism helps.
Community and then optimism. Yep.
Community, optimism. And then the last one is something that could actually more easily be implemented because changing yourself from a glass half full person to a glass half full person from a glass half empty person might take a while. Walks in nature. Every single one of them went on about how they loved going on long walks in nature. So a lot of them live near green spaces and parks. So that's definitely a privilege for a lot of us. But if you can just go and walk, even 120 minutes a week seems to be a sweet spot. There was a British study, studied about 20,000 people, and they were like, 120 minutes a week seems to be an optimal time for you to get all the benefits without having to spend too long out in nature.
That's awesome. And I think a long walk in nature is by definition the opposite of a shortcut, right? The shortcut is like, how do I get to the post office? And you're saying go the opposite way. Although I will say it's a shortcut because
there's no pill yet, or there's no one treatment yet that's going to make you younger. But these are things that over time, I don't think it just makes you live longer. And I think it helps you live a happier and more fulfilled life as well.
That's awesome. How can people contact you? Find your test, contact you if they have any questions. What does that look like?
So I am actually going to share my screen for the final time because what I have is our contact details on here. And we also have a discount code for everybody who has attended the talk today.
Awesome.
Take $75 off your first test. This is, I think, among the best discounts that we've ever done when you use the code SUMMIT75.
Well, thank you. I assume it's because of my, we'll call it optimistic personality.
Yeah, exactly. Optimism, it pays off. But go to MyDNAge.com and you can place all of your orders there. And contact us by emailing us at info@mydnage.com.
Awesome. And one last question. What is something in the near future you are excited about?
So beyond the cancer panel that we're looking into and the launch of our dog age test, another thing that I'm really excited about is just seeing more developments in the longevity field. We've already shown that when it comes to epigenetics, there is a way to reprogram this. They've done the mice studies and restored sight to blind mice. So what are the next steps and what are the applications for people? It's not going to be overnight. It's still going to take a while, but exciting things are on the horizon.
That's pretty cool. I thought you might have said the pickleball tournament that you're playing this weekend. I don't know.
No. Whoever plays on my team tends to lose.
So you're recruiting.
Yeah.
All right.
If you're a good loser, you can play with me.
So you can go to MyDNAge. So it's MyDNAge, but there's no extra A, right? So MyDNAge.com. And if they want to reach out to you, I assume just submit a contact us form. Abigail, this has been an amazing conversation. Thank you so much for joining us.
Thank you so much, Chris.
I hope you enjoyed this episode of the Live Beyond the Norms podcast. Make sure to subscribe and follow. Also, make sure not to be that guy, the guy sharing this podcast with people who are not interested in living beyond the norms. If you would like to learn more about the ESS60 molecule, the molecule responsible for the single longest longevity experimental result on mammals in history, a full 90% extension of life, visit myvitalc.com. That's myvitalc as in carbon.com.